Hi guys, welcome to another installment of the See Through Café, curated by the WeareGriot Collective, comprising of Felispeaks, Dagogo Hart, and myself, Samuel Yakura. It is presented by the Mother Tongues Festival in collaboration with Rua Red and supported by South Dublin County Arts Office. So today we are honored by the presence of Claudia Hoareau. She's Irish Kenyan, Creole by ethnicity. She's an anti-racism activist, an inclusion, race and equality consultant, a speaker, an educator, an artist on so many levels with over 20 years experience in the art space. And over the next couple of minutes, we'll be picking her brain over a very, very interesting topic today, which is just exploring the role of the arts in Ireland as a growing multicultural society. But first of all, Claudia, it's nice to have you here. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation. Thanks a million.
Awesome. So we'll jump right into it. A common theme is, that Ireland is, gradually becoming a more multicultural society, thanks to globalization and, the need for interdependence. Over the last couple of years, 10 to 20 years, we can say that, I think the last time I checked, over about 12 to 15% of the Irish population, is both immigrants from Asia, Africa, and other parts of Europe as well. And with the rate at which the country is becoming more multicultural, I think it would be an interesting conversation to have and to sort of understand what the role of the arts is in helping to to advocate for this cause or to add to the conversation. So what would be your initial thoughts in terms of the role that the art has to play in advocating for Ireland growing as a multicultural society?
So, I mean, to be honest, I think the arts is massively undermined, and I think the role that the arts can play as a tool for what you're calling multiculturalism, or what is sometimes referred to as integration, is so powerful, but we really haven't even harnessed. I think we've only harnessed a very small fraction of that, right? I also want to go back to the use of the word multiculturalism. I would argue that we are multicultural already, okay? We see multiculturalism in our communities. So what we want is actually interculturalism. We want to be at a point where we are existing together in spaces where we don't feel that we have to deny other parts of our heritage in order to be part of this space that we have joined or we're living in now. And I think that is somehow that difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism. It's also sometimes this slight irritation I have with the word diversity, because I think people look at diversity as that's the answer, but actually diversity is what we have already. You've just said we have almost 15% of the population are people from different parts of the world. That means we're diverse. We know we're diverse. So what's the next part after that? How do we move the conversation from diversity to inclusion? I feel the arts is a huge part of that, but we're definitely not harnessing it enough. So, I mean, yeah, those are my initial thoughts, I guess.
Absolutely, and I really love the way you said, there's this difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism. The fact that we don't need to do anything to be multicultural. We already have hit that point. Now, what we're looking for is that sense of communal consciousness, where we're able to see the other person or see this person from culture that is different from ours, that shares different values and way of life, and still be able to exist in a society. So now that we're looking at a society that has these different representations of culture, obviously there might be some tensions that would arise as a result of that. What would be some of those tensions, and how do you feel the arts can serve as a sort of buffer to help manage those tensions that might exist between or rather in in that kind of society, Ireland being the subject matter?
I think, there's a couple of things. So obviously, when you're talking about people having to, there's actually the Algerian philosopher Frantz Fanon, he talks about the stages of integration, if you like, or immigration. And he talks about how people go through, especially when you're younger and you move to a society, you go through things like, first of all, denial of your own heritage, because you feel like you are just so desperate to fit in that part of you just wants to do everything you can do to fit in. After that, you go through, I can't remember what they all are, there's 4 of them, but they're so interesting. I think he talks about then going through a point where you're so sorry that you've done that denial for so long that you now go the complete flip side, where you're almost, so loud and so exaggerated about your country of origin or your culture of origin. And then at some point you come to a middle ground where you feel this is what you need to do in order to assimilate. So I think it's interesting when you talk about tensions, I think it's tensions on lots of different levels. So you have people who come from a multicultural background going through their own internal tensions, and that is everything from fitting in, assimilating, to acknowledging and accepting their own origin and their own culture. Then the tensions that they have to deal with when they're then dealing with the external community around them, and that is everything from bias to racism to violence sometimes, and all the other external factors. And then you have, and it's interesting, I love you used a phrase, a communal consciousness. I'm definitely stealing that one. It's so beautiful because that's kind of then what you have happening if you take a step back from all of that. You have, for example, Ireland in the international community is known as this land of artists, this land of poets and dreamers, and people all across the world love Samuel Beckett and James Joyce and Dagogo Hart and Felispeaks and Samuel Yakura. So, so this is actually culturally and historically, we are in a country that is known for this stuff already. So then you have this influx of people like us who are growing up here and who are artists and who are not feeling, bound by the fact that we have come to a country that's known for it, but actually want to be part of that. And so then there's that tension. Now, I actually think there's part of that tension that's kind of beautiful in some way when it comes to the arts, because it's that feeling of, I don't need to compete with you to add to this, and also because the arts is something that is such a powerful tool for transformation. Like if you think about the arts, your sporting or physical ability doesn't matter. Your academic ability doesn't matter. It's how you consume and what you feel and what you create and how that makes someone else feel. That's all that matters when it comes to the arts. And so this meeting of the historical and cultural reputation that Ireland has as a country of artists and creators, this meeting of that with now, so many different cultures doing it within an Irish context is nearly creating this beautiful tension. I don't have another word. Maybe it's communal consciousness, but it's I love that. I love that meeting. I'm loving it at the moment. I don't know if that properly answers your question, but that's kind of my interpretation of this sense of tensions.
Just to add to what you're saying, Claudia, I think I remember when we had Boy Child, which was the play that we had a few years ago. It was such a Nigerian play or such an African play, but it was communicating on another level outside of what we're trying to say culturally, because there was a lot of themes in it that people from different cultures could relate to. So I think one of the importance of art in according to your question anyway, is that we can start seeing the similarities between these different cultures and people start to realize we're not as different as we think.
Yeah.
100%. I actually have a funny story. I have a funny story about Boy Child. a friend of or previous colleague of mine came to see it, not knowing that I was in it. She just had booked the tickets, came to see it. And she's a white Irish woman who's married to her partner is from Eastern Europe, and they both came to see it together. And I then saw them about 2 years later, and the partner who's from Eastern Europe said to me, you know, I always tell my wife she's the extra meat in my F4 stew. And I was thinking, that's what you remember. He was like, I love that line.
And it's so unique. It's so unique. Like it's almost like there are only certain spaces you can hear those kind of lines. You know, I think what I keep hearing is that the common denominator is our humanity, irrespective of where we come from, and there's just that common denominator that there's a line by D.K. Chukwumerije. He says there's no culture that is older than being human. And whenever I hear that line, it just speaks to me on so many levels. But yeah, that was beautiful commentary there. Let's talk a little about art education. Now we've touched a little on artistry on sort of like the commercial level and, you know, in the society and all of that. But let's bring it back home, back to, you know, the beginning, in terms of taking art to schools, starting to, for lack of a better word, indoctrinate the young minds. How effective is art education in helping to create that sort of consciousness, communal consciousness, or, you know, sensitivity that we want to see the country take in terms of, you know, driving towards a more intercultural society, as you said?
Well, if you look at art as an expression, which is what it is, like at a very basic level, it's an expression of the artist. And if you're trying to teach children or teach young people through expression and how to express and how to do that effectively, positively, inclusively, then, you know, if you're not using the arts, then you're missing out on a very significant tool for teaching expression. Because how do you teach expression? You know, it's very hard to do. It's one of these like abstract ideas, like teaching empathy. You know, you want to think that you're teaching your children how to be kind and empathetic, but how do you do that? There is no formula for that. There's no books on that. And expression is one of those things. So a way of doing that is to bring people through a process where they get to explore and refine how to do that and how expression manifests itself. And the clearest way to do that, in my opinion, is through the arts. I suppose what's happening now, or what exists at the moment, you know, is very much kind of art as an exam subject. And that's not to say it's not working, or it hasn't been, you know, teaching expression, but it's taught as rote learning, you know. So there's the poets to learn. At least now people are studying Felispeaks for their living, so that's wonderful. You know, but there's that sense of it's existed so far on a particular plane, but how do we move that from that, you know, to that conversation about expression? I don't know, Felicia, if you have any thoughts on that, seeing as you are on the syllabus.
I think the interesting thing about art education and how it adds to the conversation about interculturalism is that it doesn't always have to be the theme of the art that you're creating within the school system. So what I mean by that is it could be as simple as actually just bringing a range of voices in to discuss like other ideas with the children, and by virtue of having a Black Irish woman in the room discussing empathy with the children, invariably the Black Irish woman will explore this art subject through her eyes and her life experiences, and then you have like you're exposing more children to a range of types of Black Irish people, a range of types of Eastern European people. So then they get to experience them without thinking that they are also a monolith. Because if you're experiencing them as people rather than subjects, you you are able to understand more nuance rather than like this is what they are in a book, which happens quite often in the education system. You're opening this history book and we're talking about famine, and now everybody's turning around to look at the one black kid in the room. So instead of using topics that are already difficult to understand or that already treads along the lines of discrimination and invariably you being racist while you're explaining it because you don't know enough about it, the best thing to do is just expose to multiple types of persons so that they can learn by seeing and being around people.
That is really beautiful, because it almost sounds like it's been too mechanical to be effective. So literally just, creating that space, that contact where, they can just exist with those people. And like you say, empathy and all of these human traits that we want to see between these different cultural expressions would be able to exist. Wow, that's interesting.
And I think that also speaks to the point on representation and why it's so important. Because I think people miss that when we talk about representation. They think that it simply means that, you need to be seeing more color on screens or you need to be hearing different voices. Yes, you do, but not necessarily just that. You need to also be speaking to, or hearing from a Nigerian pharmacist or a Chinese farmer or a traveler filmmaker. We don't need to be talking about oppression necessarily all the time, or we don't need to be talking about issues affecting our community. We are so complex and we're so amazing. Like, there's so many more things about me than anti-racism that I can talk about. So there's that sense of exactly what Felicia is saying. When you start looking at the person as opposed to the topic or the theme, it's so important. I think, and that's often missed when we actually talk about representation. Because representation can turn tokenistic so easily because they think it's about, let's have the black girl on or whatever. It's not that.
And I think ways to combat that, because I get a lot of emails about, we're doing this thing and our company is really trying to do better at diversity and inclusion, and oftentimes it's coming from a great place, but being the black artist that's receiving these, I kind of don't care, because at the end of the day, it's beyond the fact that I'm skilled. It feels like you're only contacting me because I happen to be black and skilled, rather than I am a black person that has this experience, but I'm so skilled that by virtue of being in the room and by discussing art in general, race will come up because I'm black. Do you know what I mean? These things, and not to say that we should just wait for the moments to spring up. I understand intentionality. But if you start treating artists as if they are also the encyclopedia of racial matters as well, that's scary, because then you get black artists being put in conditions and positions where they're not equipped for, but because that they're black and they're skilled at their particular art form, now they're in these positions where they're saying things that they're not too sure about. They're expressing facts that they don't know are facts. And by doing so, also you're setting the whole conversation back, because now, even if you don't mess up today, maybe by the third conversation that you have this racism, diversity, inclusion topic, you've messed up because you didn't know what you were talking about. So that's another thing that I've started, replying furiously in my emails. There are people that do this for a living. There are people that know what they're talking about. Whatever I have to say is in the poem.
Oh my goodness.
Anything after that, you're more or less just asking Felicia what she thinks about the idea, not you're asking the smart black babe. That's not what that is. I don't represent blackness. It's too scary.
That's so true, and it cuts across board. It's not just even in the art sector, even in when you're looking for a job, you have companies that they're employing you not necessarily because it makes them look good in that kind of sense, and it almost becomes a numbers game. Okay, we have 97%, so let's have 3%, but when we start going that route, it still doesn't solve the problem at its root. You know, because if we don't, it's the way you see the person. You know, it's not so much about what they do, what they represent. It's who you see them as. When we start to see that this person is not just doing what they do because they are black, but because they are human like I am. You know, that sort of changes the entire conversation, and it becomes easier. It becomes, you know, we deal with a lot of these tensions less. You know, it feels a lot less mechanical than it has always felt like, you know. And so coming to on a broader scale now, you know, in terms of government policies and things like that, where do you think we are in terms of keeping up with the rate at which Ireland is becoming more, you know, multicultural or intercultural? Where do you think we are in terms of, you know, the government pushing out policies or programs, and where do we need to be?
I mean, I think the government, after a very long time, have finally started taking baby steps, which is equal measures frustrating and a little bit encouraging, I suppose, right? So on one hand, you have, you know, a couple of weeks ago, the Minister of Justice announced that she is now putting forward the bill for hate crime legislation. The campaign for hate crime legislation has been going for over 10 years. So, you know, so you have obviously that joy that, okay, yes, this is finally being taken seriously, you know, coupled with the sense that, well, it's also taken 10 years, right? And that's one example. I think generally you're looking at, and I feel like this has been the theme of this conversation, how to move from this kind of one way or one off even style of looking at something to how to embed it into culture. You know, and like Felicia was saying, and Dagogo, even if you look at schools, actually, just going slightly back to education, I recently did a workshop in a school, and the teacher was saying, you know, I tried to engage the students who are from ethnic minority backgrounds to take part in the Intercultural Week coming up. And, you know, some of them were really into it, and some were just really resistant. And I was struggling to see why they would be resistant. And I was like, why would you struggle to understand that? First of all, they're awkward teenagers who don't want to do anything else to make them stand out. And one response she got from a student was, if it isn't about sports or basketball, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm not the expert on the Congo. My parents are from the Congo. Like, I don't know. You know, and she was so taken back by that, because she was like, well, surely you could, I don't know, wear traditional attire or talk about food. He's like, I don't know anything about those things. I like, you know, he said, I don't even like food from my country, if I'm honest with you. I don't like it, you know? And so she was kind of talking to me about how can you better engage the students. And I was like, student-led approach. Would you like it if I came and told you, I really need your input on accounting, whatever, policies in so-and-so place, and you're a teacher? Aren't you going to look at me like, well, I don't know anything about the accounting exams or whatever? And that's the way I had to put it to her. So I said, your approach has to be led, or, you know, affected-led or student-led, in whatever context we're talking about. And I think it's interesting that we step back, look at broader society. That needs to be the same approach. You know, so we're not talking at anymore. We should be talking with. We should be trying to figure out at what levels do we need to be connecting, rather than here's this great thing we came up with that we think you're going to love. We're going to just put this on you. You know what I mean? And it's the same even with the example of the hate crime legislation. We have civil society groups who are talking about, okay, that's great. That's great after 10 years that you want to pass the bill. Can we see what this bill looks like? Can we see how it actually impacts people of color? Like, what does the bill actually say about racist incidents or bias in the workplace or whatever? You know, like, we need, you know, and so there's part of that unpacking that I think needs to happen in all spaces. And it needs to be relevant to all spaces, like school, like government, but also like the arts.
Yeah.
You know?
Ooh, I think the arts is currently famously known for being the most progressive parts of where we have this conversation. And I think that's part of the danger as well, because I've noticed that we've repackaged what one, multiculturalism and interculturalism is, but also repackaged what racism and what racist actions look like.
Yeah.
And so we get into these dicey situations with white Irish counterparts in the art sector where like, oh, we're doing a great job because we're talking about these things, but it's like, but can I call you out on the fact that like racism isn't always malicious intent? Can I call you out on the fact that like this particular incident that happened isn't something that is casually swept out under the rug because you didn't say the N-word or because you didn't intend to offend? That's another thing. So like peeling back like real talking point layers where we all get uncomfortable, because one of the things that I'm hearing a lot as well is that we're open for the uncomfortable conversations, but really are we? Because the uncomfortable conversations is the reality that you're racist, and are you comfortable with owning that reality and thus working forward? Like we're not even in that spot yet. Recently I was in a conversation and two white Irish ladies were in there with me, and the one of the white Irish ladies was like, we're all racist, and the other lady kind of looked at her like, we are? Like she was like, yeah, that we don't like to admit it and whatever, but we are all racist and we have to do a daily work, and that reality is actually scary for people who are hosting the progressive conversation. You know,
it forces you to look at the difference between intent and impact. And I think that's where there's often that disconnection, because your intention is one thing, but that's what you focus on. But I didn't mean to be. I didn't mean it that way. I didn't say the N-word. I. That doesn't matter, because the impact on me, and it doesn't stop with me, by the way. I go home, I tell my family about it, my partner, my community. The ripple effect of the impact, is so much greater than what you think your intention was. And so those are exactly as you said, those conversations are uncomfortable because of that, because it's forcing you to confront your intent and the impact.
Wow. It's impossible for us to have, exhaust this conversation in 30 minutes. We're definitely overshot for time. We might probably have to do, this again, or continue this conversation off the camera, or in some pub or wherever. But yeah, this has been amazing, insightful. Thank you so much, Claudia, for being here with us. I think definitely one thing that we're all taking away from here is the fact that this is not a conversation that we are just going to leave in the art space. It's something that has to happen in every home, in every classroom, in every office space, before we can actually see the country move in the direction that it should, not just like, because anytime I think about us having this conversation in the art space, it's almost like a teacher teaching in the classroom, but the students are outside. Because it's almost like we're having this conversation in this small bubble, but the people we should be having these conversations with are out there,
That is just true, because the people that need to hear what the four of us have said is not the four of us.
It's not the four of us, So we definitely love to do this again. Thank you so much for being here. You were so gracious in, being available. Thank you for allowing us to speak your mind. And thanks to my amazing hosts who were just, amazing today. And we thank all the contributors, Rua Red, Mother Tongues Festival. Thank you so much. And it's a wrap. Hope to see you at the next edition.